What did Nadine call this last night? Mandodium, yeah. Well, I'm a man, and I'm going to use the mandodium, at least for now. But I reserve the right to sit on front of the stage or use that one, or let someone else introduce a poet. That may happen too. Hey, this is the last event of the, is this the second? The second Cascadia Poetry Festival. Thank you for being here. God, what an amazing weekend it has been. It's just been amazing. And my name's Paul Nelson. I'm the founding director of SPLAB. Thank you all for coming tonight. The sponsors are many, and you see them, including the small press fair folks. I hope you guys buy books on the way out, and maybe get them signed too. Is anyone here who has books willing to sign some afterwards? Stephen, Magid, Heather, Francis, yeah? 826 people, are you gonna maybe sign books too? All right, so there will be book signing afterward. This event is supported by Poets and Writers, Inc., Humanities Washington, For Culture, Sakura, a sushi bar in Burlington, Washington, of all places, Cascadia Community College, Leaf Press, Page Boy, and Naked City Brewery, who provided the beer for the beer slam and the after party. I just like saying their motto, get naked. So we're grateful for that. The volunteers that have made this fest possible are numerous and amazing, and I can't remember all of them, but someone might help me. Meredith, if you can come up here for a second. And my wife Meredith, chief among them, the volunteers that need to be thanked for this event. I don't know. This thing, it might be able to, it's not on yet, but.
Not on, there it is.
There
yes,
it is.
Yes.
She's on
yes.
it. So we want to thank, first of all, Angel.
Yes, Angel
Is
Lateral.
Angel in the room?
I believe she's still sitting at the table.
She's still sitting at the table.
outside.
See what I'm saying? It's
yes.
that kind of thing.
Yes.
So Angel, we have to thank. We have to thank Nadine Maestas, panel moderator and MC.
Yes.
Yeah. Remarkable. Nadine also spearheading the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course, working with Jared to make that a massive open online course on Cascadia poetry to start not this summer, but next summer. Jocelyn McDonald, is she in the house, Jocelyn?
I do not see her.
I don't see her either, but we want to thank her and we want to give her a hand, Jocelyn. Thomas Walton for helping with the small press fair. Thomas, you're a mensch, thank you. And a beautiful poem last night at the after party. Yes. Who else? Everyone on the organizing committee?
We had, and we had an incredible group of Seattle University students who stepped up and volunteered. You know, they were asked to by their wonderful professor Sharon, but they were fantastic. They were also helpful and gracious.
We had one of them washing carrots and chopping carrots last night.
Yes. Yes.
We need you at a poetry festival to chop carrots. Count me in. It was great.
So.
Graham
Yes.
Isaac, the after party man, and Rachel Hugg.
Yes.
And Aaron Kokorowski.
Yes.
And Maria Winters.
Yes. Alex Bleeker.
Alex Bleeker.
Yes.
And Thomas Walton.
Yes. And I also want to thank John Burgess. I believe John Burgess is in the room. Yes, John Burgess. He helped me out of a sugar crash coma one day when I was about to collapse, and that was much appreciated.
That should be good.
I think that's everybody.
Yeah, I think.
And I would like to thank my husband. I was running around like a crazy person, but you were doing a lot of details too, and you were amazing all weekend.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
That's amazing. So, Cascadia 3 in Nanaimo next year, so make your plans now. I understand that Kenmore Air flies from Seattle to Nanaimo. What a flight that would be. We have many poets tonight. Some are with a group called 826, and then 4 other poets after that, and then it'll be over. And the first one is, that'll be over. I'm going to drink. I'm going to drink. Jared Leising is the other guy involved in the MOOC, and he lives in Seattle. He's the author of a chapbook called Widows and Orphans of Winesburg, Ohio. He's a longtime volunteer for 826. Before moving to the Northwest, he got his MFA in creative writing from the University of Houston, and in 2010, he curated the Jack Straw Writers Program. Right now, he's a teacher of English at Cascadia Community College. How perfect that they're involved in the Cascadia Poetry Festival. And he's going to tell us about 826 and bring on some of their writers. Jared Leising.
Thank you so much. The mic is hot, I guess. So I want to share, a little bit about 826 Seattle. It's a nonprofit writing and tutoring center located in Greenwood. It's been around for, 7 years now, I think. And all the services for kids 6 to 18 are free. We're a creative writing center that's hidden behind the Greenwood Space Travel Supply Store. And it's a fantastic place. It's been one of the best experiences in my life as far as working with writers. And I'd encourage you to check it out. There's a table here. Our program director, Steve, is here. Raise your hand, Steve, please. Yes. So talk to him afterwards. We have free books and flashlights. And so this isn't heckling you or Morse code in the poems, but there are things out there for you. So please visit the table and talk to Steve afterwards. The group of poets that are coming up here, we're in a workshop that I taught in the spring called Mountains of Poetry. It was also offered in the fall. And what it was a 2-day workshop in which one day the kids came into the writing center. These are 3rd through 5th graders, and kind of learned a little bit about poetry there. And then the next session, we went to Carkeek Park and spent the time exploring that, writing about what they experienced in the park. So you're going to hear a little bit kind of related to the park and from that workshop from 4 of our star poets from those workshops. The first poet is Sophia Baldwin. And Sophia is not just a poet, but she's also an award-winning science fiction writer. She won a contest through EMP recently, and that's kind of where I first met Sophia. And in the fall, she took the Mountains of Poetry workshop. So please welcome Sophia Baldwin to the podium.
So this is kind of random, but while we were at Carkeek, under the picnic table that I was sitting at while I was writing the poetry, someone had left these 3 little glass jars, and so I wrote about that. So the poem is called 3 Jars in a Row. 3 jars in a row, all of their lids stolen by thieves. One faces upwards, the others sit, trapping clover and grass, shoved up against its wet, glassy edges lie helpless blades of emerald grass. Rain boots unite the jars for a musical use. And my second one is called A Giant's Croquet Set, and because at Carkeek they have this really big croquet set that looks like it could be used by giants. So, a giant's croquet set with loops of bright colors, stripes of all sizes, colorful patterns, strewn on green grass, tiny blades, hardly like fuzz on the giant's big feet. Giants swing the huge poles and send balls tumbling, their feet squashing prints in the soft, squishy dirt. Thank you.
And our next poet is Max Tran. Come on up, Max.
Hi, my name is Max Tran, and I'm going to read you 2 poems. This first poem is called Chickens. Chickens, eggs lightly falling to the ground, clucking, pecking all around. Rooster crowing, time to wake. Eggs for breakfast until you're full, but please stay for another mouthful. The second poem is called Poems. Pots and pots full of poems, poems about pigs and poems about wigs, but my favorite poem of all is about overalls.
Thank you, Max. Max had another poem he didn't read because I said we could only read 2 poems, and these are his choices. But he had a poem called Mountains of Poetry, and there was a line in it I wanted to share from you. It goes, and Max took this in the fall. The leaves from a tree are as colorful as salmon, getting their spawning colors. So, which is a nice transition for our next reader, Tulalam Tai. And Tulalam is probably one of the funniest, most smartest, energetic little kids I know. And if you want to know anything about TED Talks, she's an expert on them somehow. So please welcome her to the stage. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Twitlam, and tonight I'm going to read 2 poems I wrote in 826. The first poem is called If I Opened History. If I opened history, I would find ancient civilizations and slavery, from space to life, from myth to technology, which is all in the past. My next poem is called... Oops.
Just give them a chance.
My next poem is called Untitled, Leaves Falling Down During a Beautiful Fall Time. With leaves turning to red, yellow, and brown, they slowly fall and touch the ground. With humans like you and me, we step on them for fun, which makes us happy. They are crunchy, smooth, bright, and beautiful. Thank you.
And our last student reader is Mia Papadakis. And I want to say one thing about Mia before she starts, is that she's got a poem about a very special place to her, and to a lot of you, probably heard about it recently, Oso, Washington. And I'd like to say this is the first time she's read this poem to a large audience, but she first read this at Rhodes River Ranch. She read it to the owner, and sort of brought her to tears hearing this poem. And she said, would you please read this at a fundraiser for the victims in 3 hours? And she was willing to do that. And I think she'll probably read it again soon. So please welcome Mia Papadakis up here.
Hi, I'm Mia Papadakis. I'm 10 years old, and my poem is called Oh So Beautiful Oso. I wrote it because I've spent many summers in Oso, and after the mudslide, I wanted to show what Oso really is. So, yeah. I feel as light as a feather. The wind could lift me off my feet. The birds are chirping, the sky is blue. I smell the pine of the trees. The grassy field is a soft pillow to my feet. The sun shines on the earth, so green. The rushing water of the river makes a splashing sound as it glistens in the sunlight. I dip my toes in the cool, refreshing water, closing my eyes soundlessly. The flowers are blooming white, pink, purple, and blue. The horse's hooves clop against the ground. Nature's music bursts in my ears. The trees rustling, the birds chirping, the river and wind. The moon shone brightly against the snowy white mountains, leaving footprints of all the memories in my mind. Oh, so beautiful, oh, so.
That was great, you guys. Please give them another round of applause. Like a lot of you, I've learned a lot at this festival, and especially about nearby poets that I've never read or heard read before. And I think that oftentimes I'm like, what's wrong with me? But at the same time, I'm like thankful for what Paul's done and what everybody's done putting this together. Poets like Emily Kendall Fry, Kaya Sand, Dan Raphael, and Marilyn Stabline, which means I'd like to close with a poem for Portland. It's part love letter, part restraining order. And it's inspired by a bumper sticker. Keep Portland weird. Keep your voodoo donuts, your velveteria. Keep your Church of Elvis open forever. Keep your city blocks worth of books in print, and I'll keep this short. Like you, I'll opt out of terrorism task forces. I'll build 10 bridges across the river. Just promise me you'll keep your acupuncture project up and running alongside the urban Iditarod and your city commission government. Keep the change, and I'll start bombing churches with yarn and hills with bikes. Keep your sales taxless, your water fluoride free, and you can keep pumping my gas. Just keep your distance from Seattle and easy drive. Thank you.
Jared Leising in 826 Seattle. Hey, I forgot to mention a couple of very key sponsors. Spring Street Center is the place that housed the poets, that had many events. The after party was there, the beer slam was there, the living room was there, and they have a raffle going on. We'll do a drawing, but we'll do that outside of the festival. Spring Street, say again? Oh, Christ, yes. See, that's why that's one of the reasons I have around. It's like I can't remember all this. And yet I am fed because of them. Joe and Kathy, can you stand up? Are you in the room? Yeah. Can you give them a hand? You know, when those first couple of big grants started not coming in, I thought, well, at least we could do is feed the poets. And you fed the poets in an amazing way and nourished the poets too. So thank you so much. Very, very tasty. That sticky rice today. Spring Street Center is one name for the House of Subud Greater Seattle, which is my spiritual community. And I think people got a little taste of what we're about. And I'm grateful for Subud Greater Seattle. There's a few Subud people in the house. They have owned that house at 15th and Spring for 40 years this year. So they've been a presence in this town for a long time, and a quiet one, and one that has changed my life. And I'm very grateful to my Subud brothers and sisters. Our next reader is Magid Zaher. He lives in Seattle. He's the author of Thank You for the Window Office, The Revolution Happened and You Didn't Call Me, Portrait of the Poet as an Engineer. He once wrote in a poem that someone had, quote, a bicyclist's sense of entitlement. He's a genius. The Stranger says so. Genius number one tonight. And he's a Marxist who does IT for Nordstrom's. Maybe he's going to help crush capitalism from the inside, as long as he still gets his 401k. You know, it's that embrace of duality which helps him see the ironies in modern life in casino capitalist culture, maybe better than anyone in Seattle, most likely better than anyone in Seattle. In the last poem from The Revolution, it goes, in a city under heavy rebranding, there are bearded men and lovers walking to McDonald's, the one next to the armored vehicle. Please welcome Magid Zaher.
Hi, everyone. This is the first time I get introduced as a Marxist. I think I am. I want to thank Paul and Nadine and all the people who are responsible for this lovely festival. This festival is interesting because I'm from Cairo. Hi, Steven. Yeah. I'm from Cairo, and if there's anything green, we eat it. So it's very strange to be part of Cascadia, where there's lots of green things. Anyway, I'll read for 12 minutes. I build structures of your voice, of anticipating your blood, or forgetting the echoes of your body. Intimacy begins with sadness. They are excavating next door. I am waiting for them. To step into the world of rocks, half bitter and half asleep, breaking from this diet of oxygen and ink, the occasional tendency to inhabit spheres. I am going nowhere near life, near birth. Assigned to seat 15A, it's okay to moan before taking off your jacket. Need to create time to stare at things. In the different bookstore corners, I wasn't really looking for books. I was searching for a gap in the world, mostly caused by humans. There were people with deformed bodies. There were people with deformed bodies from bad medications. I stayed outside in time for the weekly beating. Is the sound okay? Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Heather. I carry my body over the distance between home and work. I couldn't save the streets from myself. Then I log into some website with images to sexualize. Love is inaccessible here. We have, instead, a future to build. At least I know now that death will work out. I will be spending a lot of time talking about beauty. Cross-legged like a lost statue, I will go back to my old habits. Watching time changes whom we should pick as lovers. Upstairs is where we will apologize to the living for the bad weather. I need an opportunity to dress up and go shoot strangers at the borders. Stapled to all kinds of papers, I lack precision. We tried to engage as machinists in the revolution, but we missed the exact moment of power. I am talking about the madness of every day, of how we organize ourselves and how we work as if work matters. I'm addressing the madness of buying horses. I have nothing to bring to this exchange. The moment I can breathe longer, I'm out of breath. At an offset from the moon, the body is a product of disasters. I like how you have many copies of yourself. But then, who we are without the curves of our bodies, their vagueness when together, their indeterminacy when by themselves. The problem isn't desire. The problem is how time passes and shifts desire. I will match your hunger, substituting time with a labyrinth. We will come back on the image of good machines. The river doesn't forget. The river doesn't forgive. It dries out. We fall outside the scope of tragedy. We experience thirst. At this point, it feels appropriate. Chivalry is a matter of bleeding. We start to negotiate and I step into your driveway. Sex becomes less coherent, like sleep, adolescence, and hunger. We discuss hunger, but feel the particular intrusion of loneliness. Every 12 hours, we are shattered and rebuilt on the image of each other. This is the last one I'll read from this depressing set of poems. So, yes. No. Your skin triggers my loneliness. Maybe it is also triggered by childhood awareness of the sexuality of adults. Half lovers have their dance. I'm jealous, so I perfume. The dialogue of our mutual absence travels with me. You navigate your illusions toward your wounds. I navigate my wounds toward you. Together, we cross a bridge in our way to the laundromat, our feet dusty with incense. Okay, 5 more minutes. I'm an engineer, so I have to. Sex isn't an escape. It works for a while. If I stop thinking of hope and focus on your naked pictures, as I jerk off amid tanks and imagine the coffee shop turning into an orgy, tonight I can write the saddest lines. Sex won't work. We are left to combat the middle class with mere hands. Because pain has no logic except breathing, we walk or cab the last distance from hope. The air doesn't move the window pane. Our tea makers worry a lot. They keep us aware of our death drive. Scribbles undamage me. I will act as an entrepreneur and sell you computing devices and baked goods. I thought all the power to the Soviets and woke up among well-meaning Marxists who stayed up watching old songs about love. I prefer to be lost in Seattle dimness, turning slowly into a nature poet. Writing about leaves changing colors and ugly highways I will ride the bus to work and hide from the passengers. I will also hide hope in an okay refrigerator. Intimacy has its cruel logic. Guided by the white lines on the parking lot floors, we are headed toward our sappy police, and we are caught pretending our software works. I promise you will escape crucifixion. There are the ones who are disabled for the rest of their lives. And there is us, sitting without evidence on fulfilling highways. It's cold here, earlier than the cabs. Tonight, I received part of imperialism as a gift. Tonight, I thought of the clouds as pure and felt some closeness to you. Tonight, we will have our annual job meeting about hope, and it will culminate into a hand job. Tonight, I will water the plants. Hope and roses and hand jobs are marvelous entities. I'm not always a dirty poet. So, for example, I'll read you a sad poem here that has no sexual connotation. Oh, dead bird, come live here, next to this dictionary. We will take walks by the edges of trauma. Okay. So this is the last poem. Thanks so much. And I really like the 826. They were marvelous. And I'm looking forward to hearing Francis and Stephen and Heather. Words are slices of time. Together with few bags, they travel with us after the duty-free. If surrounded by noise, they allow forgetting. I will love you as a collateral of revolution. Thanks. Thanks, bro.
Mag is here. I said this before, it was a little over 2 years ago that we had the first Cascadia Poetry Festival in the old Splab in Columbia City that was in a former elementary school classroom. And then across the hallway in the gym, we had the after party. And it was because Sharon Cumberland was one of the after party participants. And she had a good time and discovered Damon Arundel. And she thought, would you be interested in doing it at Seattle U? And she was like, yes, and here we are, and it's because of her. It's because of Sharon Cumberland and her generosity. You know, when you put your reputation on the line by letting poets in your house, it's a dangerous thing. And she said, don't worry, there won't be any poems about hand jobs, and then see what happens. I know, that's what happens, so. Could be weird. They're Jesuits, though. They can take. You know Bill Bixel? Do you know Reverend Bill Bixel, who's been arrested many times in protesting the School of the Americas? He was doing time just a couple of years ago at almost 80 years old. I interviewed him and I said, you Jesuits are always getting into trouble. And he said, not enough. Not enough. Hey, speaking of trouble, that's a good segue. Stephen Collis is the author of 5 books of poetry, including the Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize-winning On the Material from Talon Books 2010, and 3 parts of the ongoing Barricades Project, An Archive, The Commons, and To the Barricades. An activist and social critic, his writing on the Occupy movement is collected in Dispatches from the Occupation. He teaches contemporary poetry and poetics at Simon Fraser University with one of the most amazing special collections libraries in the world. Tell me the name of the library again.
It's called the Bennett Library.
Wack Bennett Library, yeah, with Tony Power. They decided in 1965 to focus on Beat and Black Mountain literature, and McClure's archives are there. And I read so much about his production of 3 poems that it was an amazing help for me. So if you ever get a chance to do, I told McClure about that, and he's like, "Did they make you put on the white gloves?" You know, when he went in there. Yeah, put on the white gloves and go check that out. He was so brilliant in yesterday's panel on innovative poetics, where he likened capitalism to the atom bomb when he said capitalism is a doomsday device. Brilliant. When asked by Paul Constant of The Stranger, who Paul, could talk to about Cascadia poetry, the first name I suggested was Stephen, because Canadians know U.S. American poetry, but we don't yet return the gesture. And this festival and the series of festivals is an attempt to correct that. Activist, teacher, and brilliant poet, we're delighted to present Stephen Collis.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, everyone. Nadine and Sharon, is it? Yeah, organizing. It's just fantastic. And I really want to thank especially all the poets who read. And there's so many poets have read, I think, of the last few days. And I've seen a tiny fraction of you, and that's tragic, but it's just amazing. Embarrassment of riches we've got here, it seems. I'm going to read 3 poems. I'm going to read 2 from To the Barricades and 1 from The Commons. And this first poem, dive right in and save time, is called The Mysterious Barricades, or Barricades Mystérieuses, which is the title of a piece of music by François Couperin, like a late 17th century French composer. Not that he comes up here at all. I don't know what wind brought it here to douse candles found in other people's poetics, like references from pop culture that make us laugh a little because they are awkward and embarrassed to be seen in the Baroque parlor of some sleepy pseudo-commodity of a poem, or so we are led to expect. But it was here just the same, crescendo of Radiohead's Karma Police, the felt presence of my dead sister, Wordsworth-like, handing me the text of the perfect revolutionary poem which does not exist. This was my literal stage, a lyric brilliance you couldn't escape. I stepped out back to smoke, which I don't do. The sky was just like the sky a car in reverse might speed sloppily away from, and that wind was still blowing. The fire was spreading new notes of another music, and I knew I didn't want to write poems like that anymore. In Dr. Strangelove, there's that colonel, thought it was the water, started shooting up his office. And Peter Sellers, playing more than one character, did not ride a bomb down over Russia or through a Texas night hot with executions. I tear down and rebuild the book 100 times in some badly lit garage. It doesn't matter. Art will always fail us. Our radical friends accidentally saying, Trotskyite organist, choose refusal one after another. An opaque sky will open and barricades will only appear in streets I have never walked or driven down. I cough into the puppet on my hand, its face contorted behind dark sunglasses, a professor of only pretend politics. Peter Sellers pulls his arm back down into his wheelchair, struggling to control a gesture we recognize for a minute there, with an uncomfortable laugh. All right. I'm going to read a poem from the Commons. It's a 2008 book, and Talon Books in Vancouver are just going to print a second edition. And they've been letting me go through and tinker and make a few line edits, which I've been really happy about. So my mind is back in this slightly older book. But there's a very Cascadian poem in here. It's called Blackberries, and the blackberry I have in mind is actually the Himalayan blackberry. It's an invasive species. It was brought to California in the 1880s, and it's now managed to go all the way up Cascadia in like just over 100 years to the very northern end of Cascadia. But it's a wonderfully political plant because it seems to have an antagonistic relationship to private property, which I love. It grows on fences and ditches that mark private property but aren't necessarily part of the private property, it would seem. It loves vacant lots and abandoned spaces. It loves these ambiguous easements along the sides of roads. And anywhere we wonder, like, who owns that land? Well, there'll be blackberries there, that's for sure. And it's just one of the few things that we Cascadians, still feel very self-righteously, that's something you get for free. You go out and find that. So many people I know, if you see it for sale in a grocery store, which you do once in a while, I'm like, blackberries? They're growing out by the dumpster. I'm not going to buy them in the grocery store. Okay, but this is only halfway a Cascadian poem because almost all the words that are in this poem I've taken from somewhere else and reassembled them. They're all from Thoreau because Thoreau also saw berry picking as a very radical gesture. So the most famous story is when Thoreau gets out of jail for not paying his poll tax. And the way he narrates that story twice, slightly differently, but almost, more or less the same, two different locations, he tells the story. And he says, I bumped into a party going huckleberry picking. And he says, within minutes, we were miles away in an expansive huckleberry patch where the state was nowhere to be seen. So, blackberries, political fruit. Thrust out backward bramble common. No visible fairyland, utopian terse, my companion and I along blue wall, sudden as children, throwing the baby in red dress, frozen the quilted thrush, no other interest save pecuniary, voluntary huckleberry party effects, the hedgerow, the light dissolving into mercury flash paper prints. The owl, the sod, the soft gravelly bank's elastic nature confounds vagrants meandering river wrecks, strew bottoms, rivulet shrubs nuthatch, thither all birds in woods, spring nights and chickadee lisps, especially for aldermen and epicures. Do not feed the imagination as study out of doors, let alone your garden cease. I am astonished, quenching, click, focus on brambleberry dell, over against self window us, a vision compelling in part, scattering a legion about one, my companion whispers between berries, the glory of architecture grows, many an unnoticed wild berry, vespertinal habits the walking of, which the springs of life. Growing imaginary alternatives to chain link. I'm pretty sure chain link's not in Thoreau. Marginalia of suburban texts. Rubus remains August edges improvements converts. Leaves gentrified junk swagged with fruit taking to the fences points unjoined canes lines spreading. Indefinitely spreading lines curving fruit. Centers circumference Euclid arcs radius. All right angles are incongruent. Infinitely many intersecting commons coil. To find wind sudden together, along roadside untended curving canes, walk fields wood scent selves, those which you have fetched yourself carry us thither baskets, shake off village return senses, prospect harmony radius never quite, familiar of all large trees, people would begin mere objects to the state burning fences. A rare red low being, where it grows prickles sparingly. This sound information in fives, sides of canes and leaves, fifth berry of the year, trundled amongst trees to offer form to swallows' songs or robins trying to recognize the shape of a nest amongst tangle of twigs and bramble. I should note that the number 5 is really important to the blackberry. The canes are sort of 5-sided. There's all sorts of where the number 5 shapes that plant. And these lines are all 5 words a line, and you can sort of sometimes hear the pause every 5 words, but there you go. Found in Emerson, antennae and stamina, fuller dial, rejected, downcast, delight and interjected, this else, solitary and clear perception was, no apples theft from others, orchard, each fruit wild and independent of any other, though many taken together make a better tart, or with cream as his almost constant companion. To monopolize the little Gothic window then did I use, with eyes upturned the clouds, to wander in rich drapery, that I might peep a truant hawk or write a brief obituary as to what of the beautiful it had lived election amongst the plants feeding all kinds of pensioners. Everything miracle spore-sated geometry, found equinox thrusting words having no connection into all parts of every sentence, bootjack, for instance, taking liberty nothing and no place ventured gained, to wit the berries' abundance. How could any contain scarcity, this many hands picking sense, to gather scrutiny shared provenance? Built subtle shack uncommon, turned back clock solitary nary, chipmunk dug borrowed mode buried, thrift silent merchant spent days, mellowing this captioned self gave banks mud warmed winged life, those large and late low, whortle spur snare buck prune, run over common dense clusters, clammy acid taste countless variety. True flavor never purchased obtained, lost with the bloom become mere provender, thus finished errand miles off midst endless berries, nowhere state seen history prisons, amidst sweet fern and sumac, or growing more rankly in low ground by rich roadsides. What no one owns shared thus are blackberries, remnant commons. All right, that's an excerpt of that poem. Can I drink this water? Thank you. It's a very long poem. That was probably half of it, though. All right, so another poem I'll excerpt. I have a terrible habit where I so focus on how the poetry is in my head and so many, I guess, other aspects of it, then I finally, when I come to thinking about actually reading from and performing the book, I find I go in and change the poems even after once they're published. I go, oh no, I would never read that. So this is a poem that's a little bit longer that I only ever read this slightly shorter version of it. And I'll end with this one. It's called Come the Revolution, which is just a phrase a friend of mine said on Facebook. She said, people used to use a phrase, oh, come the revolution, well, those guys will get theirs, or we'll do this and we'll do that, or it'll be like this, come the revolution. And because it sort of has this inevitability to it, right? It's going to happen, so. We seem to lack that sense of inevitability now. Have the children left? There's a few rough words in here, but anyway. Come the revolution for Larissa Lai. Come the revolution. We will the revolution. We will return to the revolution, return to the sensuous body of language. Come the revolution. We will return to the sensuous body, and sound will propel us through the barricades of others, the revolution, through the barricades of otherness, and come as mere sparks will spark us. Come the revolution anew, and we will the revolution come anew, and irony will no longer bind us. The sensuous body of language lift us, fringe to feather to fold us, the sensuous body of our methods, single togetherness, and come the revolution. We will have the revolutionary time to live the silent lives of animals, the revolution. Animals we have lost, that is, animals we have killed. The extinctions, corrupt economies, come the revolution, throwing off sparks and new economies, and throwing sound will propel us through the revolution sensuous, the animal walls we are as producers and consumers. consumers as time and sound and the sensuous body of language will come the revolution when banks will have shaken, banks shaken to shivers, shivers come the revolution. All fossils fuel for their own revolution will come, and walking as sound through sensuous bodies formed, we will walk through an endless park, sensuous a park. We will walk from each of our abilities to each of our needs through sound, the revolution. Come sensuous, come stroll, come the revolution. We will roll through birdsong and singular birches. Come the transformations of home, and together the revolution. This ecos will echo the sensuous body I speak of. Together the revolution. Through this others effulgent, so others come the revolution. We will echo new limits. We will wrap self-governance in limits, wrap the sensuous body of human tongue in animal revolution, self-governance in bios and animal wrap, sound all lifted to be level, to be small habitations and habits, to be level animal and sound and sensuous bodies, small hearths of animals own, all of us animals, all animals come the revolution. We will come to be animal, to be sound, sing the revolution. We will sing the swords out of songs, sing swords into songs, songs through flowers, through fields, sing bees through these fields, sing chemicals out of oceans, sing economies, capacities, even sing balance, sing home, sustainable, sing sustainable, come sound, come sensuous bodies, sustainable, sing songs of the absence of oil and death of the oceans, unsustainable, of tanks and guns and airstrikes, unsustainable, of endless colonial occupations, unsustainable, profit, motive, and equity investments, unsustainable. Sing, come the revolution. Sing a jubilee for all the revolution. Sing, come hammer, come storm. The revolution will come, and we will, as animals, as sensuous bodies, begin to be born. Come the revolution, I will lift a voice of everyone. And in the poem, everyone will be listening, and I will say we are free, or a force, and we will be saying this, and we will be free, and we will be a force, and I will say we are broken but whole, and equally, differently so, and we will all be broken but whole, and equally and differently so. And I will say I am with you, and we are rising, and I will say this in the form of a poem. And we will be saying this, and we will be together, and we will be rising in the tireless forms of our poems. Come the revolution, culture flourishes best not in isolation, but enriched by the simple connection of our belonging to the land, so that everywhere we are the animals, that know too well we are the animals, that must find our limits and love them, and we will govern ourselves within them, seeking agreement before confrontation, without government, a political class, or the media that accompanies them. Come the revolution, shit will no longer be fucked up and bullshit, and that which is loving in each of our hands will touch that which is loving in each and every other's hands. And while reading this poem still won't be the same as storming a bank or a parliament, you may yet be reading this poem to a group of people with whom you will presently be storming a bank or a parliament. Thank you.
Come the revolution, all the IT people at Nordstrom's will be Marxists. Stephen Collis. Frances McCue of Seattle is a poet, essayist, reviewer, and arts instigator. She was the founding director of the Richard Hugo House. Her second poetry collection, The Bled, published by Factory Hollow Press, won the Washington State Book Award in 2011. Her book of essays about Richard Hugo and the Northwest towns that he wrote poems about is named after a line in Hugo's epic poem, Degrees of Gray in Phillipsburg. The book is The Car That Brought You Here Still Runs. A book of prose, Mary Randlett Portraits, is forthcoming in September. And currently she's writer-in-residence at the UW undergrad honors program, where she was the 2013 Teacher of Distinction. The Bled, by the way, I'm not sure if she's going to be reading from that. Maybe not. She'll probably be reading newer work. Is a remarkable accomplishment, which shows that the act of writing about horrific personal experience can be made beautiful, can give us energy and allow us to be fully human as we experience, not exactly secondhand, but as witnesses, having the experience of the poem itself. She is a poetry dynamo, and we're delighted to present Frances McCue.
No, I'm not going to read from the bled because I don't know if we should have scotch and like crime tape out. You know, it's kind of like it's a pretty heavy duty book. So I've written a whole bunch of new poems, and hopefully they're funnier. How could they not be, right? Than the bled. Okay. And then this happens. The crazy love fly roamer under the whip of spring turns the corner, and I'm standing along the edge of the bus zone so many of us find infuriating, with the bus not coming and not coming in this atmosphere of waiting, where the trajectory of love's crazy flyby pitch is right in my face until it takes all I have to resist. So I don't. I'm in. Lounging on the cusp of go-go and let, and then the opened arm tickle along his ribs and his lips until I'm gaga with it. This is from reading D.H. Lawrence. The 19th century. Nature simply opened her bloody maw and swallowed human feeling. She spat out places of sorrow and melancholy. One stone waited a millennium to trip the mistress's horse, and the wall slacked, the moor swelled, the fen took on a stench. At goose dinner, for the sake of history and theology, ministers joined the barristers. What liars and poets they all were, confusing people into craving sentiment, alpaca sleeves and bastings, soft lapel rolls before the run of battleships. Oh, how voluptuous to have a body but not consider it so. See inside the hillock the flame that bloomed, the rock that shone. Strike the tents, someone glowered, and the landscape turned. We rolled on. It's my little Cascadia poem. I have a friend who's a private eye, and it's like having stories piped into your house, and you just get to write them down. He was trying to explain to me that it's really super hard to actually hit someone in the face. He was on a case that he had to, one guy said I was hit in the face, and he said it's really hard to hit someone in the face because, we have all these defense mechanisms. So let that be a lesson to you. Yeah, this is called Fights Breaking Out. It's hard to hit someone in the face, my friend, the private investigator, said. To connect is not all that easy. Landing a punch, knuckling the bone, smashing the cheek, honing the fist, who knew it would be like this? When Bob Sturgeon hit the river, the water hit him back. Big Jerry took halibut from the trawler, and the winch bashed his forehead. All these punches coming in, swinging and landing while the guy at the bar keeps closing his fist and missing everyone over and over. The whole point, really. Okay, it gets wackier. There's an artist who died in the 80s named Helmi Javonovan, who was from here, and maybe you saw her work at the Fry. She was an obsessive maker of kitschy things, sort of the big mama of the DIY movement without knowing it, right? And she built little altars in the back of her apartment to the painter Mark Toby, and she would collect bits of his clothing and make all kinds of things for him. And finally, the director of the art museum at the time, Dr. Fuller, had her taken and put down at a sanitarium at Oakhurst, which is down in Elma, Washington. And I think a lot about Helmi and how her work has sort of been appropriated and also celebrated. And I keep going over and over that oddity, and I keep rhyming her with Elma. And I was singing all the time, Little Helmi down in Elma. And so this is just going to get it right out there. at Oakhurst Sanitarium. Little Helmy down in Elma, full of shame, mighty Elma, place of discord, held the folks we called insane. Little Helmy down in Elma, little Helmy just the same, made her puppets, oh, the dolly with the black face. Little Helmy, what's her name? Little Helmy down in Elma, in your room you made do, with your paint down in Elma, where you moved. They took you away, little Helmy, most of you. This is for all the children who can't help causing trouble. And then as adults we go, who are you? Okay, so this is called Some Children Are Strangers. Truth tellers within clatches of Victorians, flower pickers among grave diggers, children who crowd the nest and topple intentions, who crow amidst the swans. They arrive when storks fly backwards and get the destination wrong. Hard on clothes, ruinous to carpet, feet stained from alleys and creeks, thumpers along floorboards, wild gorillas on sheets, inkers of white sofas, wild ones who snarl and dig trenches, they scratch and shout. Some want to stay in and others to get out. They become the people they'd been warned about. Kite crashers, hem rippers, girls who drive boots through skirts, crying boys with broken spectacles, fumbling again. Foul syllabics ensue. Though every child seems a new seedling, he's actually a shard of glass in the shoe. Others fold their wings, nod their heads, and wait. Misfits, songmakers, cottagers without lanterns, strangers in their prisons, fledgling artists, at last, of their own escapes. I'm not going to read that one. Good Lord. Okay. What was I thinking? Okay, this is one of those kind of old-timey lesson poems. You know, I'm just so tired of the verbs to have, to put, and to take. I mean, I'm just sick of them, and I'm sick of seeing them in everything, everywhere, and I don't really know why. They just seem very kind of like paper towels. Okay, to have, to put, and take. Oh, weak glue, to have and take or put, the slow words of placement, like the guy who steps on the rake and hits himself in the face. Don't put the rake in the yard. Do you even have a rake? Are you being a rake? Take the rake away. So you see, the ever-seen are soon invisible. Monsters take precedence. They put on happy faces and have us by the hand. I also have this day, you see, taking and putting all my things into it and knowing all the while what a rickety dwelling pen I'm making and trying to calm down in. Okay, and I'm going to read this last one. It's for Paul Nelson, he's like a health nut. This guy's like a health nut, right? And I just asked him about his probably hugely conflicted relationship with Whole Foods, like I have. So I think of Whole Foods as a food museum. Like you wander through and observe, but you do not buy. And it was like F.A.O. Schwartz when my little girl was little. I was like, oh no, honey, that's not a store, it's a museum. So this is called At the Food Museum, and it's a little trip to the Food Museum on the heels of reading Chaucer. Yeah, I know, right? Okay, there's a lot of problems in this. Okay, at the Food Museum, one should not go, and certainly never after the thick heather of Chaucer's poetics. Tales befouled by gamey birds and stews of blancmange and dark meats, fair to a shoe in a land of watercress and petite pears flicked from the wit of stems. But go I did, forging through the groomed pillages of the mighty food preserve. Let's call it a museum, this foreboding place you know, sure to bestow budgetary woes. Drive I did, and tread I must, where I am not permitted to purchase, by accordance of my rules, the $6 turnip or the minced cucumber soup. Viewing is the pleasure, I whisper to the produce folk. Hats off to you, the keepers of vegetables and fruits, a beautiful display. Okay, all right. I am wearing my oat brown coat and thinking of an egg or two. No more tro or rice milk dessert as was offered verse-wise in Chaucer. A dainty morsel will not pass my throat, not of these treasured bits. I will pass instead here within the exhibits. Across the moat, arriving through the doors, a lonely pilgrim in gabardine, that man there, from Amazon or Zippy.com, roaming in, baskets swinging, tagging along on a lunch hour. Beneath the stacks, with plummets imminent, tomatoes ripening on the twigs, on the ropes shipped here from far away, flown over droughts into lands with sprinklers set free, underneath the hedgerows where the shires of lambkins glisten. Limbs startle our gentleman. He moves aisles deep within the castle, nestled along the bower, where small fowl cramp within the cases, little beasts tied across the breasts and knotted so tidily. The green still in the flower, bathed in every vein, gorse and thistle back amidst the hemp caps. I wish to say this to our visitor. Sweet dreamer amidst the gunk and fen, the crowds along the tower, oh, emerge then in the sweetest song of the dinner hour, to mingle along the corsairs, the coupes and Buicks, and the debt maimed, to find the shimmering memory theater of the grocery list. Everything we've come for, hunted then, gathered and tamed. Thank you. Heather. And first, I want to check on Heather's tech support stuff. Are we all set? Okay, so I'm going to introduce Heather, and then we will go. So have you all seen this book, 1987? It's called To the Quick. It's a real treasure. Seamus Heaney has a quote on the back. Lots of impulse and energy, bravura. I mean, that's amazing. So I've never gotten to read with Heather McCue before, and it's a complete thrill for me because I've been living under the umbrella of her last name for years. And it's like warming to the McCue furnace, the big furnace of Heather McCue, and I just couldn't be more honored. I met Heather McCue when this book came out. It was 1987, and I was in the heart of grad school at UW. I was lucky to be in her class along with my wild friend, Greg Ellis, who it turned out had crashed the program. Like, you know, he wasn't paying any tuition, he didn't belong, and he just went to every class. And those were the days, I mean, it wasn't like the Richard Hugo days, but it was like the days when you could bring beer to class and, you know, sort of carry on. And it had this kind of warm theater spectacle feeling of getting to be around Heather's brilliance and her language play and her warmth and encouragement. And I have to say that those days of that wordplay, the love of sound, the awe of her translations that I had, really presented to me the spectacle of a wild mind that was fueled by generosity. And, you know, let's pause for a second and think about that. There are a lot of beautiful, wild minds, but they're not always fueled by generosity, and I admire that more than anything. So I think Heather is someone who takes the two ends of a metaphor and like rubbing two sticks together makes a huge, huge flame from the unlikely. Bringing together sort of a snapping and cracking of language that to this day still rings in my head. And so as a young poet, I've been incredibly inspired. You know, back then I was, and I still carry that young poet around with me when I think of Heather and her work. The other thing I really admire and want you all to know about her is that she's been devoting her time to a nonprofit she started called Caregifted, which focuses attention on caregivers who are struggling to take care of people who really need it. And Heather has taken her time and intelligence and her energy and bravura to that enterprise, and I couldn't admire that more. So please join me in welcoming the author of 8 books of poetry, Heather McCue.
To bound up these stairs like Max or Sophia. Or to cultivate Sophia's withering look and musical jars. I have all kinds of extras up here just in case. I am, one brings to all technologies, including writing, the love and wariness they deserve. Are you cascadiated yet? I'm so glad to be here, particularly as a dual citizen. It's one of the reasons I am here. That is, as the product of the sword fights between my mother and father. I made my home in border territories from the first. My mother's people came from England, my father's people came from Ireland. They didn't know their people, but you could deduce it from them. And these are feistily related islands. What begins as an attraction of opposites winds up in war as oft as not. And you'll recall what the Irish-born Beckett said when he was hiding out in France and working for the resistance and bringing in a vendange or two. Asked by a French villager, were he English, he replied, au contraire. You don't need a bloodbath to tell there's a dearth of affection among some relatives. It's right there in the lick and the lash of the tongue. I could tell that, for example, only not by his protestations or professions, that my father was probably a loyalist and royalist, because he called the nether end of the bird the Pope's nose, and because he had jingles that went on about the pup that pooped in the pulpit and the cat that crapped in the crypt. And I loved all the linguophilia of it, but it took years before I figured out that it probably meant something politically. And I'm still struggling with that dimness in myself. You guys are all good at knowing your revolutionaries. I myself just try to turn around once in a while. I got born on the U.S. left coast when my father moved us all from Victoria to La Jolla, where he got his oceanography degree, but by then they were both naturalized. It seems to me you should get artificialized when you come to the U.S. But when we moved to Virginia, I was the only kid anywhere around whose mother said tomato and whose father had a totem pole. It wasn't for another 30 years I was able to retrieve my long-lost, much-missed Canadian citizenship, and I didn't renounce the U.S. one either, because poetry, as Novalis says, heals the wounds inflicted by reason. Bishop is right about the maps. The far more interesting maps are not the politicians' maps with their boundaries laid out in some kind of historical arbitrariness. As far as I'm concerned, history is arbitrariness. The far more interesting maps are the ones, the finely detailed and dramatically colored ones that belong to geologists, coast and geodetic survey guys, the maps that tell you something about altitude and verdure. And redure, for that matter. Those are the pleasures. And it's also that the former map requires that you take sides, where the latter map doesn't. The latter maps don't. They invite you. It makes a line be the kind of line. The kind of line I love is not the line that demarks and separates out so much as the place where things touch. And I'm a specialist in that place. I always was from the time I was a kid. I mean, the way I knew what something was to rub it against my lips or get my meat hooks on it or taste it or something. And the border territories are the sensualists' territories, and animals flock there. I mean, you go to the littoral, for example, actually when it's spelled properly, means the shoreline. The littoral, and animals flock there. You go to a shoreline at dusk and you will see interesting associations and socializations occurring in the act. In a sense, it seems to me much of intellectual life itself is a kind of bicameral politics, and that's not enough cameras, in my view. Just because we have 2 ears or 2 balls or 2 tits, somehow it doesn't seem to me enough reason to develop an opposition. I sort of love this Cascadia. One of the reasons I wanted to come to this one, I don't do reading so much anymore, but this one I could not keep away from, because it seems to, I'd rather take heart than take sides. And if we stay, it seems to me, in earshot and eyeshot, then we don't have to save up so much buckshot. And I'm against the againsters. It reminds me, this convocation, how natural borders work, not as oppositions, but as appositions, works of nature, not the legislature. Googlishly clicking away from Street View from nation state first to Street View, because Street View looks pretty interesting after nation state, because you can do these swooning upswings to the sky, just I do love it. The Google Mapmeister, I have a secret love for. Or you can click off entirely to the topographical perspective or onto the planetary view. And, sometimes I think that a poem is what happens when a Hummel telescope falls in love with an electron microscope. And now it seems to me one of the purest joys of technology is that we can even make maps of time, maps of the incidence of, say, artificial lighting as darkness runs around the earth. You see it, you just can track it, trace it, and see it as a motion. It's a description of us, but one that we couldn't have known of ourselves without the instrument. And I feel that way about language, that it's not that you tell it what to do, you use it to find out what you do. It reveals to you something about yourself. And I love the technology that means that in a flash you can see the curves of seismic or paleontological change. You can stream the earth. At its best, technology helps remind us how everything, even rocks, are streaming. So my thought today was to try to offer, because I'm not experienced in this realm, I'm really terrible at it, and so I have a considerable dread about it, which communicates itself to those who have no dread ordinarily. I wanted to offer a few Cascadian chorales, that is to say, 3 or 4 or 3 little pieces in the key of Salish C, which is a sound of its own, with its own swelling and subsiding. So bear with me as I hope we can play around with a few currents and wavelengths, because the very medium we're in is also in us. It seems to me a kind of amniotic, hypnotic thing. And all the human arts grow out of that sympathy. I do sort of think that our very grounds are a kind of intricate waterworks, not even just speaking of chemistry, but emotional life. So no single thing, if we're lucky, that wonder worker, that wizard of a woman back there in that booth.
I stole the starfish. First I thought the creature less than handsome, less of a hand than I expected, rigid with a stumpy gray asymmetry of grasp. It wasn't soft, it hardly moved, so maybe it was dead. I couldn't see beyond myself until I turned the matter over and beheld billions of unfamiliar facts, minute, transparent footlets, feelers, stems all waving to the quick, and then the 5 large radials beginning gradually to flail in my slow sight, and then in my thin air to drown. To send it as a gift to you who were my missing part so far inland, instead to a world the sight of no rights to the dark that's out of mind. I made myself resign it, fleeing the hand from my hand. I made myself resign it, flinging the hand from my hand.
Well, sorry, that was not, the words were not audible. The balances didn't come through quite right. And also that was the third poem, but that it has some qualities. It's hypnotic. Whoever invented GarageBand gets that round of applause. It is really fun to fool around with. There are 2 others, and I'm not going to bother to try to introduce them because I don't know which one's going to come next. But I will say that the boundary between water and land is a place where creatures were born to live. I mean, there are creatures who are born to live there. I'm one of them. Intertidal zones, interwavelength zones, intercranial zones, somewhere between the words we lost in the first lapse or lappings and the words whose fine incisings keep getting ground away off the headstone, which is last but not lasting. And rock, I noticed as I was going over trying to think about these literal zones for this occasion, I realized how many of my pieces from the time I began, from the book that you mentioned till now, include these 2 media, rock and water. Again, that's the literal, it's the boundary between states, the solid and the fluid, and the Canadian and the United Station. I can't bear to say American, it seems so presumptuous. And as you see, I can't always tell one state from another in the ways that people find customary. I'm bad at customs. Customs actually sends me into a sort of panic where I remember the duty but not the free. But lyric arising as it does from a kind of music that I think is already interior, and which I love to study on the outside, helps me a lot with meaning, which is a problem. It's like the stone in the current. It's the thing that wants to establish itself and make some monumentality. And I can't love a monument, but I love what runs around it. I love what flows around it. And for me, that's the music of language. That's the language that will tell me rather than be told what means. So whatever is coming next, I'll be curious to hear.
Your hand is hard. You raise your eyes, and there's a pair of small beloveds caught in buckets. monocle and eye patch correspond. You take a glove. Your hand is soft. The ocean floor was done in lizard skin. Around a log or snag, the surface currents run like lumber about a knot. A boat is bent to sea. We favor the medium we're in. Our shapes are around us. It takes time. At night, when the bed is alive, what teller of truth could tell the two apart? Lover, beloved, hope is his command. Your hand is given when you take a hand.
Those clicks were supposed to be more calculated. Your hand is given when you take a hand. I'm going to let it go at that because I don't, there's been just such a wealth of faceted sounding here tonight and throughout this occasion that it seems better to celebrate it all together with one big hug right now. And thank you all for having me come and letting me be part of this, and for remembering what boundaries matter, that bound is a verb and not only a noun. Thank God. Take care.
Oh, Heather, thank you for that. That was stunning when that came over the speakers. It was just, who screamed out, that was beautiful? Who was that person there? Yeah, well, you were absolutely right. Amazing. It sounded great. It sounded great for me. I was mesmerized. And I'm mesmerized by this whole festival. It's a fitting ending. Thank you for being part of it. Thank you, Francis, for that beautiful reading. Magid, Stephen, Jared, where are you? There you are, beautiful. Can we have a hand for all the poets who read tonight? Cascadia 3 is in Nanaimo next year. I want to bring a contingent of, as George Bowring says, U.S. Americans to Nanaimo, and I hope you'll join me for that. The Nanaimo Organizing Committee really understands that this is about building community, and Kim Goldberg and Heidi Greco have been at Cascadia 1 and 2 and will be at 3. So we're very grateful to Nanaimo for coming up to that, and we're hoping to make Cascadia 4 be on this side of the border. We're working on an anthology, 100 Innovative Cascadia Poets, the working title, and also a massive open online course. One guy we didn't thank, he's been really relentless about the videography. Ranan David deserves a hand for capturing all this. When you see the map that David McCloskey did, if you haven't seen that, it'll have that kind of effect that you were talking about. And David, I think, is talking with the Nanaimo group about being there. So thank you very much, and God bless Cascadia.